In every single culture that we have recorded history of, there is evidence of a menstrual tent of some kind. And this was a structure that people would go into to menstruate. Oftentimes we menstruated together under the dark moon, which is the 2 to 3 days before the new moon. And the fact that there were menstrual tents all over the world in every single culture, I believe is a signpost that there was at one time a reverence that was held for the ceremony of menstruation.
What is up, my witches? Welcome to the Queer Soul Alchemy Podcast, a supportive community helping queer folks to embrace their authentic selves by exploring yoga, astrology, and spirituality. I'm your host, Lee Devi. What is up, everybody? Welcome back. I'm your host and favorite queer NB priestess, Lee Devi, a 500-hour certified yoga instructor, 600-hour certified Ayurvedic health counselor, and 100% certifiable self-development nerd. And in this episode, we are demystifying and normalizing the discussion of menstruation for everyone, but also from a queer-centered perspective and from my own perspective as a transmasculine, non-binary, pansexual human. For obvious reasons, I don't really see many masculine people talking openly about this online, but representation is so important, so I volunteer as tribute. So our guest today, Laura, and I discuss unlearning shame around menstruation, blood, sexuality, and our physical bodies as an intentional act of reclaiming the feminine in this episode. The conversation dives deeper into unpacking collective religious trauma and the shame that spiritual doctrines can project onto these sensitive subjects, how the dominant cultural frameworks of capitalism and hierarchy disrupt the cyclical nature of humanity. That's right, your period sucks because of capitalism. I know, shocker. But first, new episodes of this podcast drop every Wednesday, posted on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you're listening from, please make an offering to the algorithm overlords and help other queer spiritual seekers find this magic by leaving a like, a comment, and a nice little 5-star review. And if you're currently listening on Apple Podcasts, please make sure you are subscribed. According to the podcast analytics, almost half of y'all listen on Apple Podcasts, but that's actually the platform where we have the least subscribers, so please double check. You might think you're following and you're actually not, but doing so is a great free way to support the podcast. Don't miss out on exclusive access to my free self-care resource guide, which I've specifically curated for you to support your journey with spirituality. To download this guide and be the first to know about upcoming queer yoga retreats and events, please sign up for our email newsletter at youareloved.one/pod. And what do you guys want to hear about next? You can message me anytime at that same link on our website, which will also always be linked in the show notes. And tell me your story for a chance to be featured on the podcast, because your story matters and sharing our stories makes us stronger together. All right, you guys, let's dive into this episode's main content. Now, a quick disclaimer to preface this. The interview I'm about to share with you is about 5 years old, from a time in my life when I was expressing very feminine. It was before I realized that I was non-binary. And so in the interview, Laura calls me Paisley because I used to go by Paisley for years, and now I go by Lee for short. So I was a little lost during this time period. That's just to say, if you watch this interview and feel like I'm a totally different person, yes, this is pre-therapy Lee, pre-testosterone Lee, pre-knowing who I am Lee. So yes, part of what prevented me from realizing that I'm non-binary sooner is that I've always felt very spiritually connected to my period. While periods trigger gender dysphoria for many transmasculine people, that was never the case for me personally. And I like to joke that I'm a man from here up and a lady from here down. I do experience top dysphoria, but I don't experience bottom dysphoria. But every retreat I've hosted, every major spiritual event in my life, I've just happened to be on my period. And when I met Laura, today's guest, at a workshop she hosted in Guatemala, I was on my period. Now, I had been on birth control for about 4 years in college, but I chose to go off of it shortly after graduating college. And since then, I've gotten to know myself and my body so much better. And I'm even on my period right now. So I thought this would be appropriate to record this episode today. And though my testosterone levels are high enough that my periods are going to stop, this particular period is over a week late and a fine line with medical transitioning as a non-binary person of trying to keep my period and also gain masculine qualities. Anyway, as a human being who still has a uterus and breast, but who may or may not be keeping all of those body parts in the future, I do my best to care for the needs of those body parts, just as I would any other parts of my body, while they are still a part of it. In Ayurveda, the reproductive system represents the deepest and most refined layer of tissue in the human body. Therefore, symptoms of disease that present in this layer are indicative of imbalances in all the other areas of the body. So if we have a menstrual cycle, connecting to it can be like a vital sign. That is, the quality and regularity of your menstrual cycle offers potent insight into your present state of health, similar to taking your temperature or reading your pulse. This is such a fascinating subject, you guys, and I learned a lot of what we're discussing today from our guest, Laura Carmody. Laura is a menstrual cycle educator, a postpartum doula, and the founder of Threaded Red. Her work serving women and womb carriers began in 2016, hosting red tent circles in her community, curating interactive red tent installations at festivals, and spreading menstrual literacy education. Laura has trained professionally as a holistic doula and as a puberty and adolescence educator. She served for 3 years as temple coordinator at the Goddess Temple of Ashland, Oregon, where she studied ceremonial priestess arts, rituals, and rites of passage with Lady Greylin Corsini. And she has taught workshops and held retreats internationally. Over the years, Laura has become a trusted resource in her local community and online following. She has supported people virtually and locally through the entire womb continuum, including puberty and menarche, which is the onset of menses, menstruation and sexual health education, miscarriage, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and more. In 2023, Laura became a mother, which she calls her greatest accomplishment. Her profound and empowering experience postpartum inspired her to begin offering mother-centered postpartum care professionally as well. Enjoy this conversation with Laura.
Hello, welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Paisley. Excited to be here with you.
I am very excited to have Laura Carmody here with me. She is one of my priestessing mentors and has been such a wonderful friend and just a light in my life, shining on all things feminine. Laura is the founder and creatrix of Threaded Red. She is a menstrual health and empowerment educator, and I absolutely adore her.
Thank you, Paisley. Thank you for that sweet introduction. So excited to be here with y'all today. Like Paisley said, I'm a menstrual health and empowerment educator. So I love to support people as they're developing deep and meaningful relationships with their cycles. And I do that through group and individual trainings in sacred menstruation and the priestess arts. And I also bring practical bleeding spaces and red tents to festivals and gatherings. And yeah, I love talking about the womb, blood, and all things sacred menstruation. So I'm really excited to be with you here today. Thanks for having me, Paisley.
Of course. And I met Laura. I actually knew of you before I met you because I knew of your involvement at the Goddess Temple of Ashland in Oregon. I had some friends who had also been involved in your programs there. And so I was looking forward to learning with you and practicing with you. And then I actually had the opportunity to do that first in Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. And then later on, when we were both back in the States, I actually completed a red tent training with you, and it was a beautiful experience, and you just have such a wealth of knowledge, Laura. I wanted to have you on today to discuss the topic of shame, because it's something that's been really alive for me, especially in the past few months, even more so in the past year, because I've been on this journey of my sexual embodiment and empowerment. And I've also been on this priestessing path and yoga. And I do want to also make the qualification that a lot of the folks who are going to be viewing this today do not menstruate. I try to keep my content as inclusive as possible for queer folks. And I think that it's important to have this focus of menstruation kind of be central to the discussion, because the shame that it brings up does affect everyone in our society, whether or not we bleed.
Yeah, when it comes to the topic of shame in regards to menstruation, I think of my childhood. I think that so many of us who menstruate, we remember the absolute fear of possibly bleeding through in school or in a public setting. And that would be like the worst possible thing in the world that could happen. I remember just really, really fearing that and having such anxiety and dread. When in reality, menstruation is just a normal facet of our humanity. More than normal, it's actually a healthy part of our humanity. Having cycles means that we're ovulating, and there are so many physical health benefits to ovulation and menstruation. It is just our culture that has really mystified this part of our humanness. It's menstruation. It's also sex, which of course is intrinsically connected. It's also birth. Childbirth. Many of these sacred rites of passage is the way that they used to be held in ancient times. And we have lost that initiation in our modern times. And it has become something that is so shameful. And it's a shame that it's so shameful because there's really such depth and power that can be sourced from these rites of passage and from these aspects of our humanity. And it does apply to all people, whether we menstruate or not. The shame of our human bodies, these divine vessels that we have the opportunity to live within, it affects all people. Because when we reject menstruation, we reject that which created us. All of us came from a womb. All of us came into this world through the power of menstruation and the mysteries of the womb. And so when we reject menstruation, we are really rejecting ourselves, whether we bleed or not.
Wow. Absolutely. The blood that flows from the womb is life-giving in every capacity, whether or not you choose to actually create another human with that blood, or if you choose to connect with the blood in terms of it being your own life force energy. And you're right, it absolutely ties right in with the sexual energy, because on my journey of my own embodiment and empowerment around that, I've just had these realizations of what is sexual energy. It is literally that which we all come from. Without sexual energy, not a single creature or being would exist on planet Earth. And I would even go as far as to say that Mother Earth herself is this sexual being, alchemizing the codes from within her nutrients within her soil and combining with the masculine energy of the sun to be fertile and birth all the various beautiful life forms that we have. So there's so much here, especially in the West, indoctrination through religion and our origin stories, our mythos.
Yeah, wow, that is such a big query to go into. I want to recommend this book that I have sitting right next to me. It's called Mysteries of the Dark Moon by Demetra George. And this is an excellent book for anyone who's interested in this topic of what did it look like before this dominant, oppressive, patriarchal culture that we're currently living in? And what did it look like as this changeover happened from a more goddess worshiping culture to a more patriarchal God worshiping culture? It is phenomenal. I highly recommend this book. So to understand why we're here, I think it's important to preface where we are coming from. And in ancient times, menstruation was held as sacred. It was cross-culturally respected. It was deeply respected. Every single culture that we have recorded history of, there is evidence of a menstrual tent of some kind. And this was a structure that people would go into to menstruate. Oftentimes we menstruated together under the dark moon, which is the 2 to 3 days before the new moon. And the fact that there were menstrual tents all over the world in every single culture, I believe is a signpost that there was at one time a reverence that was held for the ceremony of menstruation. It was deeply respected, so much so that the whole village used the menstruators' bleed time as a way of keeping time. It was in sync with the moon, and we would all take an ebb and flow. So even if we're not menstruating, when the people who went into the menstrual tent to bleed, the whole village would take a collective ebb. They would rest. They would spend more time inside. They would spend more time sleeping. They would spend less time outside working in the fields. It was a hugely integral part of our culture. And we moved in a more cyclical way where we were in tune with the moon, we were in tune with our bodies, we were in tune with the earth. And we used the earth, the moon, the sun, and all of our celestial bodies as guidance to move through our lives. So this was a more cyclical, circular way of keeping time and of living here on planet Earth. Now we are living in a more linear way of keeping time. And I personally believe that a huge part of this changeover is due to industrialism and capitalism. So the cyclical way in which we were living, it doesn't really work with a capitalistic framework. In order to have capitalism, we need to have 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We need to be showing up the same way, day after day, week after week. The feminine flow of taking time to rest and then allowing the phase of rebirth and flowering, blossoming, and then again disintegrating, it isn't aligned with this manufacturing, get stuff done, make a lot of money. I believe that that's a huge part of this changeover that happened. So if as a culture, some people were attempting to change our understanding of time and how we relate with our bodies and how we relate with the earth, one of the easiest ways to do so would be to separate us from the power of our bodies and the power of menstruation, the power of our sex, the power of gestating life within our wombs and giving birth. So as we became disconnected from those rituals and those points of power, we in turn become less connected with our bodies, less connected with our wombs, less connected with our sex, less connected with the earth and the moon and all of the celestial bodies. And in effect, we adopt a more linear approach of time, of work, of relating with ourselves and all other people. And here we are today, a few thousand years later, where a lot of this is starting to be reclaimed. It was said in ancient times that if you wanted to destroy a village, you simply destroyed the menstrual tent and everything else would collapse from there. This was a central part of our cultures, of our day-to-day life. And it's really exciting to be alive now in this modern time where we are at the precipice of great change and a lot of people are reclaiming these sacred aspects of our humanity that have been taken from us.
Absolutely. And I want to just take a step back to what you were saying about the paradigm shift that happened from being mostly earth worshiping, goddess worshiping, living in the cyclical fashion to what is now termed the patriarchy. And I think that that term is triggering to folks who identify as masculine because it's this feeling of blame. And I just want to make the statement that this is not in any way intended to blame any group of people. This is something that happens systematically over a long period of time. And it's something that we're all experiencing negative effects from today. So this reclamation of the feminine that we're speaking on, it's not overthrowing the masculine energy in favor of the feminine energy, but rather integrating them both and uplifting them both so that we can come together in a space of love, in a space of honoring each other as divine, no matter how you identify. I think that reclaiming this connection with our bodies and this cyclical nature can be a really important part of that, perhaps the key to all of it. This is really demonstrated in the form of young women being put on birth control from the time they're like 13 years old, not really ever having a chance to be connected to their menstrual cycle. And maybe they are fine with that because they've been told their whole lives that it's shameful and gross and something to dread. Or in the men who are taught to believe you can't have emotions, how much money you're making equates to your worth as a person.
Yes, absolutely. I love the term kyriarchy in place of patriarchy. What it means, the root kyrios, it's Kyrios is the root word. It's Greek and it means ruling class. So essentially the 1% that are actively benefiting from keeping everyone else oppressed and exploiting human labor as well as the earth. And it takes a more intersectional approach where it says, okay, let's look at all of the intersections of oppression that people might be working with in this life. Because you're so right. It's not just about gender. All people, all genders, all non-genders are negatively impacted by the systems of domination and control that have taken over our world. Absolutely reclaiming the sacredness of our bodies, whether that's through menstruation or through our sensuality and sexuality or through our health, like whatever that looks like for each individual. That is the most revolutionary thing we can do, I believe, to reclaim our bodies as sacred temples that we have the opportunity to make offerings to. It's absolutely revolutionary. It changes everything about the way we move about our lives, the way that we relate to ourselves and each other, the way that we relate to the earth. So many people are really awakening to that in such a beautiful way. It's exciting.
Yeah, I remember when I first started to engage with you, you're bringing up, opportunities to do things like drink the menstrual blood or use the menstrual blood as a face mask or just an adornment, things that would be considered revolting, honestly, because we've been conditioned, like you said, to reject this very natural thing, this thing that happens to almost half of the population. I think it also relates to the other ways that we reject our primal nature, our natural nature, and just the separation from our bodies in general. I want to touch on how it is indoctrinated in a societal way, but also from the framework of religion and spirituality, because every religion I've ever encountered, and also in my study of yoga within various lineages, they all encourage this rejection of the body or rejection of the material elements of the sensory world, sensory pleasures, not in the sense that they are inherently bad and you should just go live in a cave, but in the sense that they are not ultimately what's going to bring us to fulfillment. And there's a lot of schools of thought on that. I question it deeply because I am a tantrika at heart. Tantra is a philosophy or school of thought within yoga that essentially uses the senses to transcend the senses, and it embraces that which would be considered taboo. There's even a group of tantric practitioners known as agoris, who their entire spiritual practice is rooted in doing the most taboo things that could be done. For example, living in a crematory ground and eating out of the skull of a dead human, doing sadhana while sitting on corpses. This group also uses intoxicants such as bhang, which is a mixture made from the ganja plant or cannabis. And I find this so fascinating, not because I necessarily want to do any of that, but because of how deeply it questions the, again, modern hierarchical paradigm of separation or rejection of the primal. And to me, that also symbolizes a rejection of the feminine, because Mother Earth and these bodies are also represented as feminine in those teachings.
Wow, that is fascinating. That's my first time hearing about that group and their practices. And while there's part of me that's like, oh, that's gross, I could never do that, there's another part of me that's like, more power to you, embrace that and make love with the darkness, make love with your shadow, accept all of life in all of the forms, in the full spectrum, and come to a place of peace with death. That's really, really beautiful. When it comes to shame and religion and spirituality, I personally think that it is wise to deeply question any sort of spiritual or religious belief system or framework that we are presented with, or even that we resonate with at one point in our lives, to continue questioning it. Because all of the systems of this culture have been affected by exploitation, racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, capitalism, colonialism, and what at one time may have had a much different belief and foundation is likely affected now by what has been going on here in this hierarchical paradigm for the past few thousand years. So, for example, I don't know yogic tradition very well, so I'm really just speaking anecdotally from conversations that I've had with many people. At one time, my understanding is that in certain temples in India, if you were menstruating, you were asked to not come into the temple. And at one time, that was a reverent request because it was just believed that if you were menstruating, you were going to be in the menstrual tent. You are in your own ceremony. You are in your own ritual. You don't need to come to the temple. You actually get to rest. You get to be relieved of your everyday responsibilities and you get this time to nourish. Now, in the modern world, that still remains in many temples. You are not supposed to enter if you're menstruating, but now it's under the veil of shame and taboo. And India is actually one of the places in the world where there are the most menstrual taboos still present culturally. What at one time may have been held in a sacred way has been affected by the systems of control and shame and power that we are all now indoctrinated into to a certain extent. I personally believe that all people and all systems we are products of our culture. And we then have to do that work to deprogram what doesn't resonate and to choose in what sort of alignment we want to live, what we want to align ourselves with, what are our belief systems. We have to unlearn and relearn. And so I wonder that about other religions and spiritual belief systems is at one time, was there a way that this belief of menstruation was actually held in a more sacred way? And now in the modern, it has become confused.
Absolutely. And while you were speaking, it reminded me of this idea of the ancient temple priestesses who would serve as conduits for the goddess. And it's said that men would have the opportunity to go into these goddess temples and commune with the priestesses. And through that exchange, there would actually come a great deal of healing. This idea is something that I've only heard through coming to the priestess path. It's so taboo, I think, because of what you're saying with this changeover that we've had from revering this sacred energy and this sacred ability to having it be diminished into something that is going to be used for control. And shame is a very, very powerful tactic for control, shame and guilt. And I think that's a tactic that unfortunately a lot of organized religion falls into. A great deal of these goddess worshipping or earth-based spiritual practices were overthrown around the same time that the Roman Catholic Church rose to power, because if you take over reproductive rights and health, then you absolutely have a stronghold on all people, because that's where the future people will come from. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the ancient temple priestesses and if there are any records of them or if they've all been hidden, destroyed.
Yes. So there is a bit that is recorded and encoded in different texts and artwork and things like that, where when the changeover was happening, there had to be a way that the mysteries were hidden in plain sight, essentially. Also, because a lot of these traditions were passed down orally in the menstrual tents. And so there wasn't necessarily a lot of written evidence of what was happening in the menstrual tents. What were the temple priestesses? Who were they? What were they doing in the temples? So because these transmissions were passed orally and generationally, that means that it would be relatively easy to destroy them altogether. There are some. One of the first recorded human texts is called the Sumerian tablets, and they are these giant clay tablets, like taller than me, I think. They are in a museum. You can still see them, and they are inscribed with all kinds of amazing information. Laws, their bylaws in these ancient times in Sumeria, stories about their deities, poems, lots of beautiful literature. And at this time in Sumerian and Babylonian times, the great mother goddess, her name was Inanna. Inanna was the central feminine deity that was worshipped. There were many deities that were worshipped. Inanna was the great mother goddess of them all. And the Sumerian tablets, there is a lot of amazing information about Inanna, about her handmaidens, and about Lilith. who was one of her handmaidens. If you're interested in learning more about this, there's an excellent book called Inanna, the Queen of Heaven and Earth. It's fantastic. About the first half of the book are translations of certain parts of the Sumerian tablets. The authors pulled certain parts that speak about Inanna specifically and translate them into English. And then the second half of the book is a history of what was actually happening in these times and why did they choose these words. Incredibly erotic. Incredibly erotic what is written on these clay tablets. The first recorded text that we have in human history. It is very sexual. It is very sensual. It is very funny and relatable, incredibly relatable to our modern existence. Like, it's really, really fantastic. So what I'm going to say now is not recorded on the Sumerian tablets, but it is the information that has been passed to me through priestess trainings. That Inanna lived in a temple and she had many handmaidens, which were essentially her priestesses. And her handmaidens would go out into the town and they would find wounded men and wounded people. They might have been wounded from war, or they may have been wounded spiritually or emotionally. They were just, hurt in some way. Lilith and the other handmaidens would bring these people back to the temple, and there would be sacred sexual rites that were carried out to bring healing to these men and to these people. Sometimes these rites would include actual sexual union. Sometimes they would include just dance. And through the dance and visual transmission that the priestesses' bodies were carrying, there was healing that would occur. That through seeing these priestesses as an embodiment of the goddess, they could be healed. And as the priestesses were the embodiment of the goddesses, the men and the wounded people, they came as the embodiment of the god. They weren't seen as some wounded person that could not be helped. They were seen as an embodiment of the divine masculine and an embodiment of source god energy. And even just being held in that respect alone, how much healing can occur through that if we choose to connect with each other as divinity, like just to be fully embraced in that. So that's a little bit about what I know about Inanna and her sexual priestesses.
Thank you. Wow. And as you're sharing that, the reason I brought that up is because we were talking about India. And I know that the temples in India is one place that the priestesses are purported to have done this work. And going back to the concept of Tantra, Tantra is basically, again, the school of thought within yoga of goddess worship, primarily the goddess Kali, who is the goddess of destruction. She's very feared in modern times because she is this symbol of destructive feminine power, so fierce. And this idea of engaging in lovemaking or sensuality or any type of relationship from a perspective of we are both divine. That is basically the idea behind Tantra. And I just find it really interesting that this one school of yoga, where it's primarily the goddess being worshipped, and it's also the school of yoga that gets looked down upon. In my training, we touched on it a little bit, but there's not really a mention of the depth to which it goes with Kundalini energy, goddess worship, and so forth. Yeah, it's just something that I think can be so beneficial for all of us to open our minds to. And it definitely requires, as you said, starting to decondition, release the layers of shame that we've been really brought up to identify with. Laura, do you want to talk about your offerings and where people can find you as well?
Great. Thank you so much. My main thing right now is that I have a virtual Red Tent monthly membership, and that is a place to learn about menstrual and womb education. And we also talk about circle facilitation for people who are holding their own red tents or are facilitators, healers, coaches, in whatever way that might look like for you. We have a super fun community. We have educational workshops, new and full moon ceremonies, and lots of yummy stuff. So if you want to learn about that, my website, Paisley, will link for you. I'm Threaded Red on Instagram. That's what I got going on.
Yay. Thank you, Laura. I so appreciate you being here with me today and sharing your powerful wisdom. Is there any final words or thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Yes, I would like to say that I recognize that we definitely talked about some really radical topics today, and that there are many ways that you can connect with your blood and your body, and doing it in a way that feels good and feels right for you is the most important. So if there's something that we said today that just sounds like totally crazy and inaccessible, just feel free to toss it out the window. And I really invite you to find a method of reclamation that feels really, really yummy for you.
Yes, take what serves and leave the rest. And I love that you said earlier, making love with the shadow, with the darkness that exists within all of us, because it's through integrating that there's so much healing and so much power. So thank you again, Laura, for being here.
All right, you guys. So here is a journaling prompt to reflect on the themes of today's conversation. Regardless of our physical bodies, connecting with our divine feminine energy means connecting with our bodies and our primal, feral, intuitive nature. So list the various perspectives and biases that dominant culture has shown you about the relationship you, quote, ought to have to your body and bodily fluids such as menstrual blood, sweat, and tears. How have these perspectives and biases informed your relationship to yourself? And where can you release shame that you've been carrying that is not necessarily yours to carry? To summarize, in this episode, my priestessing mentor, Laura Carmody, and I shared a fascinating conversation about menstruation, shame, and religious trauma, with the intention of demystifying and normalizing the discussion of menstruation in general, but especially from a queer-centered and trans-masculine perspective. The harmful structures of capitalism, white supremacy, and hierarchy have colonized our bodies, policed our reproductive systems, and indoctrinated our nervous systems. Unlearning shame around our menstruation, blood, and our sexuality is a revolutionary act of reclaiming our relationship to our physical bodies and reclaiming our primal human nature. If you found this episode interesting, you would love my menstrual and moon cycle mysteries course. No matter what hormones you have, this 2-hour online workshop will empower you with tools to support yourself and the people in your life who bleed. Learn the art of cycle syncing, which is the practice of synchronizing your lifestyle choices to flow with your hormones and or with the cycles of the moon, which can powerfully support both your physical and mental health. That link will be in the episode description for you guys, along with the link to download your free self-care resource guide. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, let's stay connected and stay witchy. I'll talk to you soon, and blessed be. With all my love, Lee Devi.